Hello my darlings, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Miranda and I am the Enchantress of Avalon. So for today's video, I have decided that I wanted to discuss 3 of my favorite lesser discussed and lesser known Arthurian Faery women. I, of course, talk at length and ad nauseum about Guinevere and especially Morgan Le Fay, but there is a multitude of fairy women in the Arthurian legends, and they're all fascinating. And I chose the 3 today because I think that they're 3 of the absolute least discussed, which makes me sad. I think they're all really, really fascinating. And they all appear in Gareth Knight's The Fairy Gates of Avalon. Guinevere also appears in here because this book is his analysis of the fairy women that were written about by Chrétien de Troyes in his Arthurian romances. So he uses the French names for the figures, and I'm going to explain that 2 of the knights that are attached to 2 of the fairy women I'm discussing have different names in French than Wales. Actually, all 3 do. What am I thinking? All 3 do. I'll go through it as I go. But they're all in the French romances of Chrétien de Troyes. And these are just 3 that I very rarely hear people write about or talk about. I've written about them in a lesser known Arthurian ladies post on my blog, but I also wrote about other women, so I'll link that in the description box below for those interested in even more lesser known fairy women. And I will note that originally I was thinking of doing 5, but I know I tend to ramble and I think that that would just be way too much information. So I narrowed it to 3. And let's just get on to the lesser known Arthurian fairy women. The first one I want to discuss is Enid. And she is also known as the Lady of the Hawk in the French Arthurian romances, and she was the wife of Eric, or in the Welsh legends he is called Geraint, and they meet when he defeats this cruel knight that was causing a lot of trouble around her homeland, and he had been taken in by her family where they provided him food and shelter, and eventually the 2 fall in love and they marry. But one night Eric hears her crying and he thinks that she doesn't truly love him and she's unhappy in their marriage. In truth, Enid was crying because she felt that her love for Eric had softened him so much that he no longer had his knightly virtues. And because of this misunderstanding, the 2 have to find their way back to loving one another throughout the course of the tale. And eventually, Eric does these feats of knightly prowess. He gets very fierce, and this fierceness proves to Enid that her love hasn't softened him. He is not incapable of being a knight anymore, as she had feared. And they get back together quite happily. And I love this whole idea of this misunderstanding happening between the 2. And I think that that kind of story is what would later go on to really influence the romance genre of fiction, as there's always a misunderstanding between the lovers. So in many ways, I think Enid became not only this powerful fairy woman of otherworldly origin whose family helped Eric and then they fall in love and they marry, but their story together provides a baseline for what would go on to inspire so many love stories down the centuries. And that's why I wanted to talk about her in this particular video. Now, let's move on to the next figure. The next one I wanted to talk about was Blanchefleur, and she is the wife of Percival. In the Welsh romances, he is called Peredur, but same figure. And he is the original Grail Knight. His story is really fascinating because he is raised by his mother out in the woods, completely ignorant of knights and what they are, because she'd already lost his father and his brothers to knighthood. They had died in their knightly status and on their quests. They had died. She didn't want her last son to die as well. But of course, Percival, or Peredur, he finds out knights exist and he immediately wants to be one. So he leaves his mother, quite heartbroken, to go and be a knight. And he goes on all of these adventures as he begins to seek out the Holy Grail and everything, where he has so many misunderstandings and a just complete inability to understand what being a knight is, because he was never really trained. He just kind of came to Camelot and was like, yeah, no, I want to do this. I want to quest for the Holy Grail, and they let him go on this quest, but he wasn't like an officially trained knight. It takes years to train and to really understand how to be a knight, and Percival does not understand these things. But early on in his journey, he meets this beautiful young woman named Blanchefleur, obviously a fairy woman, set in his path to help him and test him in equal measure. And her name means, of course, white flower. If you are familiar with the French language, that's what her name translates to. Now, I really love that this connects her to some other very prominent Arthurian fairy women, most notably to Guinevere, whose name can be translated to mean white phantom, white ghost, or white fae, especially when we look at Guinevere's name, Gwenevere, the Welsh version of it. So the fact that we have that carry on of white symbolizing fairy, which white is one of the colors of fairy, and that does symbolize the presence of the fae. So I really do love that name for her. But they meet, they fall in love, they have this romance. Then he goes off to continue his journeys, and he is gone for a very long time, even though he had, made promises of love to her. And it leaves Blanchefleur wondering if he truly loved her, if he's forgotten her entirely. And that's where the tension comes in here, is, has this questing knight that I've fallen for, that I've been sent from the other world to test and to bless with my marriage, has he completely forgotten me? Does he just not want to be with me? And of course, eventually Percival does, finish his quest, and he returns to Blanchefleur and they are married. But the fascinating part of her is this uncertainty. She is a fairy woman who has, I would say, a little bit less control than a lot of fairy women do in fairy lore, and especially in the Arthurian legends. They tend to have a lot of control when it comes to testing the knight or the king they are testing, because ultimately they are the ones blessing this person with their presence, if it is a romantic sense, or they are testing them and then blessing them with these abilities if it's more of a maternal sense. But she kind of loses control of the situation. She doesn't know where Percival is. She doesn't know if he even wants to be with her anymore. So that kind of almost unrequited love angle is interesting to me, because it does diverge from a lot of other fairy women in tales. Specifically, the final one I'm going to be discussing, Laudine. Laudine is also known as the Lady of the Fountain, and she is the wife of Yvain, or in the Welsh romances, Owain. He is, again, another of the most prominent knights, and he is also, in many variations of the legends, said to be the son of Morgan Le Fay and King Uriens. Now, making him, of course, a nephew of Arthur. Now, the two meet when Yvain has gone on this quest to defeat this otherworldly knight to avenge his cousin. And in killing this knight, he doesn't realize he's actually also killing Laudine's husband. And although she does grieve for her husband's death, she and Yvain begin to fall in love, and they do marry. And he spends many days, a very, very long time. It's left misty of exactly how long he spent in this otherworldly abode with Laudine, but they spend a lot of time together, and he's living there with her, and they're very happy. But one day, Gawain, who is of course another one of Arthur's most prominent knights, and would also be, in most variations of this, a cousin of Yvain as well, because Gawain is the son of Morgause, Arthur's other sister. And so Gawain shows up and reminds Yvain, or Owain, of how much she's missing questing. You're not doing your nightly quests, you're missing out on all of this. And against Laudine's wishes, Yvain is like, yeah, no, you know what? I should go on a quest. Let's go quest together, to Gawain. So they go and quest together. But before he leaves, Laudine does warn Yvain that he has a set amount of time to return to her, or else, he will forfeit her love, and that's it. She's laying down her rules, which, again, that's a big difference from Blanchefleur, who is very much not in control, didn't set down rules, didn't say, hey, Percival, you got to return to me in X amount of time. Laudine is saying, you need to return to me in a certain amount of time, or else it's over. Because again, the fairy woman is a tester, and she is a bestower of sovereignty and of grace and power onto these knights and kings. So she's the one who does have control in that realm. Of course, Yvain doesn't get back in the amount of time. He gets really busy questing with Gawain and kind of forgets to return in time. And Laudine is not having it, and no, sorry, you didn't do the one thing I asked of you, which was to return in a set amount of time. So Yvain has to regain her love, and he does so with the help of her fairy woman handmaiden Lunette, who is a very fascinating figure in and of herself, who helps Yvain win back the heart of Laudine and prove that he will not make the same mistake twice. So this is a very amazing story, and she's super empowering to me, and it shocks me that Laudine isn't talked about as much, because she is a very sovereign figure who sets down those rules of, hey, yes, I love you, but I will not have you forget me. I want to be an equal partner in this relationship, and I think that we need to set down boundaries. And when Owain fails to, follow this one thing she has asked of him, she only asked one thing, then she says, okay, no, you betrayed my trust. Because a betrayal of trust is a big thing when it comes to an interaction with a fairy woman in the Arthurian legends. But of course, as always, it does have a happy ending, because he is able to regain her love and prove that he is worthy of being given another chance with her. So I do hope you've liked this little deep dive into 3 of the lesser discussed fairy women of the Arthurian legends. If you did like it, please do like, comment, subscribe, and check out my blog, whiteroseofavalon.life, for even more content. And there is always my Discord server linked in the description box below, should you want to join the small community over there where we discuss all this kind of thing. So I do hope you have a wonderful week, everyone. Bye now.